Hatred to Kotsap, Moskals, Vatniks, Kalorids and Orks, as Ukrainians called Russians in different times, was born not today and not even yesterday. Here are the facts from history only for the last 100 to 150 years. Russia will not have and never had such haters, enviers, slanderers and even obvious enemies as all these Slavic tribes. As soon as Russia will free them, and Europe will agree to recognize them as liberated. Starting from February 2014 with the Kiev Maidan, many here in Russia for the first time discovered in Ukraine people who hate everything Russian. It is not surprising if you know the history of Ukraine in general and the history of Ukraine in particular. Not to know that it is the Bolsheviks, with the inheritance of which, for some reason, the current Ukrainian regime is fighting, gathered from the clutches of a state that has never been on the map of the world. In 1922, when the USSR was created, almost the entire left bank of the original Russian lands, Kharkov, Odessa, Nikolaev, Mariupol, were included in the composition of the new Soviet Republic. In 1939, Stalin already cut the western Ivano-Frankivsk, Lvov, Ternopil, Volyn, Rovnensk regions, which had been part of Austria-Hungary and the Republic of Poland for centuries. The end of the grave of colonial slavery, give it and bury it, the deeper the better. Then Khrushchev signed the Crimea, as they say in the People, crossed the Uj and the Eza. Not taking into account that the Catholic right bank of the Polish part of the Republic of Poland for many centuries despised and hated the Orthodox left bank, the so-called Novorossiya. Only knowing all this, you can understand where all these jumping children came from already now, in the 21st century, with the cries of Moskaliak Nagaliak. You need to know that always behind the back of Ukrainian nationalists you need to look for the very speech of the Republic, destroyed at the end of the 18th century by three great states, Prussia, Austria and Russia. That part of Poland, which became part of the Russian Empire, received independence from the same Bolsheviks led by Lenin in 1918. And immediately the Poles began to dream of revenge. The dream of the Poles to this day is only one, to recreate a state from sea to sea, from sea to sea, as they say, from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. The entire 20th century, first the Polish, then the German, then the American special services, grew and supported on the right bank of Ukraine the growth of that extreme nationalism and deadly hatred of the Russians, the fruits of which we are watching now. It is not unnecessary to remind you of the several stages of growing this hatred today. In 1929, an organization of Ukrainian nationalists was created. One of its activists was Stepan Bandera, who formed the Ukrainian Legion of Naktigol from UN members for detailed activities and reconnaissance activities on the territory of the USSR as part of the diversionary unit Brandenburg 800. His subordinates participated in punitive operations. Their beastly cruelty shocked even the top of the Wehrmacht. In the summer of 1943, Ukrainian German nationalists executed, were chopped with axes, cut with knives, hundreds of small children, women and old people. As for the Poles, for them, the close connection of the Bandera people with the Germans became a national catastrophe, which, by the way, they still did not forgive the Ukrainians. After all, only during the mass strikes on Volyn, about 60,000 Poles were destroyed. They just surrounded the villages and then cut him out. That is, they chopped with axes, hammered to the floor, to the trees, especially to children. Well, these are terrible things. Another painful point, with the help of which Western special services for many decades set up against the Russians' Ukrainian nationalist youth. Myth about the Holodomor. Allegedly, the evil Russia deliberately exterminated people in western Ukraine. But in the hungry years 1932–1933, this territory had nothing to do with the Soviet Union. The territories of the modern Lviv, Ivano-Frankivsk, Ternopil, Volyn, Rovnensk regions until 1939 were part of Poland. The territory of the Transcarpathian region from 1920 to 1938 was part of Czechoslovakia. The Chernivtsi region until 1940 belonged to Romania. But the truth still penetrated and is penetrated even to the Western audience. Back in 1987, a book by the journalist Douglas Totler was published in Canada. Fraud, Hunger and Fascism. Myth about genocide in Ukraine from Hitler to Harvard. In it, the author revealed the truth about the numerous falsifications organized at the end of the 1930s on the initiative of the United States and Germany. For example, It turned out that photographs of hungry children who went around the world were taken 1.5 decades before the Holodomor, during the Civil War. Let's add from ourselves, the famine of 1932-1933 in a country where peasants still made up almost 80% of the population, happened because of no harvest. And it was not something supernatural. The same thing happened in Tsarist Russia with a frequency of 10 to 15 years, and hunger in the early 1930s was captured in addition to Ukraine and regions of Volga and the North Caucasus. The most important stages of the growth of Ukrainian nationalism in the depths of the Soviet system was either stupidity or the intent of Nikita Khrushchev. After the death of Stalin, when the fierce struggle for power unfolded, Nikita Khrushchev was helped by the powerful Ukrainian lobby to clear the way to the position of the first secretary of the Central Committee. In gratitude for this, he makes a historic decision to transfer Crimea to Ukraine, violating all the conceivable laws. And a year later, Khrushchev amnestied the Banderites themselves. They are amnestied in a very special way. The court is automatically removed from them. They have the right to take any position, which they do. Only from 1955 to 1958, more than 25,000 Banderites, Vlasovites, Forest Brothers, former police officers and other traitors of the homeland returned to Ukraine. That's when they reached power, began to educate those who kill people in Donbass today. Incredible bomb forces were laid for the future of the country on the eve of the collapse of the USSR in 1991. Then the Kiev nationalists, anticipating the arrival of power, began to prepare their own army and formed the Ukrainian Nationalistic Self-Defense, UNA-UNSO. The sons of the Banderites defeated the Congress of the Russian National Forum in Kiev. Then their attention shifted to the traditionally pro-Russian regions of the southeast. And they began to organize so-called trains of friendship there. A person says, they are coming to us with good intentions. I answer, I ask a comrade, what will be discovered if they go for points, chains, as there is already information. In 1994, Leonid Kuchma, during the presidential election campaign, spoke with a slogan, saying that he would defend the Russian language, which caused sympathy among the residents of eastern Ukraine. However, after coming to power, he not only forgot about his promise, but also allowed the official registration of the nationalist gang formation. The arrival of power as a result of the Orange Revolution of 2004 by Viktor Yushchenko led to the fact that Ukrainian nationalism openly became part of the state ideology. The third president of Ukraine literally hit the head with the citizens of the topic of Holodomor as the genocide of the Ukrainian people. It was he who assigned the title of Hero of Ukraine to Roman Shukovich and Stepan Bandera. And on the day of victory, congratulating the veterans of the Great Patriotic War, he called for reconciliation with the Bandera people. The president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, counting the economic losses from the rupture of relations with Russia, inevitable in the event of signing an association agreement with the EU, took a step back. Street protests began. However, the interest in the rallies began to fade quickly. A week later, there was only a small group of students on the Maidan. This absolutely did not suit the Western curators. Former Polish President Kwasniewski with his comrades rushed to the capital of Ukraine. And on the same night, on November 30th, a staged rally of demonstrators began. When the rally was held, the snipers had to shoot the protesters, so that the rally could not be found, to create chaos and excitement. The rally had to be preserved, not to disperse. The government had to be overthrown. As a result of the confrontation, 78 activists and 13 law enforcement officers died on the Maidan. Hundreds of people were wounded. Yanukovych was forced to sit at one table with his fierce opponents and, under the supervision of the guarantors of representatives of Poland, Germany and France, sign everything that the Ukrainian opposition demanded. Sikorski of Poland and Steinmeier make a statement. This is an agreement from God. Finally, we have settled it. And already in the morning, after the coup, they said that we would support this coup. That is, a day has not passed. Immediately after the coup, the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine voted to abolish the law on the basis of the state language policy. The abolishment of the law caused protests in the southeast of Ukraine, where the Russian-speaking population prevailed. The acting president of Ukraine, Alexander Turchinov, gave the start of the war. Today in France, in the north of the Donetsk region, an anti-terrorist operation began. Under President Petro Poroshenko, school textbooks begin to be massively rewritten in Ukraine. In him, the post-war period is declared a Soviet occupation, the Great Patriotic War becomes World War II, and fighters of pro-fascist nationalist organizations are fighting for independence. Bandera becomes a cult figure. With the arrival of Vladimir Zelensky, who became president largely thanks to his promise of peace in Donbass, Russian TV channels were immediately banned in Ukraine. Russian language learning was cancelled in schools. The idea of joining NATO was declared national. As a result, Zelensky demanded nuclear weapons from the world. I, as a president, for the first time initiate the consultation in the framework of the Budapest Memorandum. Ukraine and I are doing this for the last time. And then he began to laugh openly during the speech of the Russian president calling for compliance with the Minsk agreements. Special status of Donbass on a permanent basis. It is necessary, of course, to extend the term of the agreement on the special status of individual regions of Donbass. Not so long ago, Poroshenko, Merkel, then Hollande, Zelensky, and now Stoltenberg admitted that they deceived the Russian side with the Minsk agreements in order to gain time. NATO has trained Ukrainian soldiers since 2014. NATO partners supplied the necessary weapons to the Ukrainian armed forces and trained them since 2014. Enraged by anti-Russian propaganda, Ukrainians are struggling with Russian history, culture, literature. Instead of demolished monuments, great writers vote for the installation of monuments by American porn actors. The brains washed for decades were born among the population of the independent mass of incredible fairy tales about the near Moscow. But all this, according to the firm conviction of our classic, is not for long. But by showing complete indifference, Russia will win and will finally attract the Slavs to itself. First, they will come to it in trouble, and then, one day, they will turn to it, and everyone will turn to it, already with children's confidence. Everyone will turn to their native nest.